Okay, thank you very much, all of you. So research has got many different things that can happen. And research really is to discover new things and new treatments. For example, which drug is best? And then the next question I want to, what is a good drug? What do you think? Tell me what you think a good drug is. Lots of you are on drugs. Are they good?
Effective, lots of side effects.
Okay, so effective without lots of side effects. That's a key point, okay? And effectiveness is quite difficult to measure because what we're measuring how you feel. And of course, I have good days and bad days. And if I take a tablet on a bad day, I might blame the tablet for me feeling ill and think that's not a good tablet. So we have to think about all of these things when we're trying to work out what a good drug is. And that makes things a bit more difficult. So yes, a good drug is one that makes you feel well and prevents illness sometimes. So we have drugs that you're not ill, you feel fine. But you might take a drug that will make it less likely to become ill in the future. And there's quite a lot of those around, we'll talk about as well. And of course, you don't want any side effects. I will say, all drugs have benefits and all drugs have side effects. And you've got to balance the benefits against the side effects. So for example, you might have a drug that makes you feel much better, but might in the long run cause osteoporosis. And then you might think, well, that's not a good trade-off. Maybe I'll run a bit, not feel so hot, but actually keep my bones for longer. And that's not a good trade-off if you're going to die young. But if you're going to have a nice long life, then that might be a good trade-off. And I don't know when I'm going to die. So that is a difficult question. Now, the other thing I want to just talk about for a minute is bias. Okay, things like, and I'll show examples of where research has given people wrong messages. Okay, and this thing called reverse causation, which I'll explain in a bit more detail what that means. Okay, so the first really important message. Ooh, there's a sound thing here going on here. Let's turn that sound down. I'll just turn that off there. Oh, now it's zooming ahead. Okay, so if there are two things that are associated, for example, high blood pressure and strokes, there is association. It's probable that high blood pressure does cause strokes. But the question is, are we sure about that? You've got to be a bit careful because it might be that when you have a stroke, your blood pressure goes up. Okay, and so it might be reverse, and that's important to look at. Okay, because if you just look at lots of stroke patients and find they've all got high blood pressure, so what you want to do to prove that blood pressure control is good for preventing strokes is put people, lower their blood pressure, and prove that over time they don't get strokes. Now that's a difficult thing to do because you need to know how many people are going to get strokes in the long term, for example. Okay, and I'll tell you how that applies to you. So that's very important. Okay, so here is an example of some research that I think has confused people. Okay, this is looking at vitamin D. Okay, vitamin D is really popular these days. Okay, it's everywhere and it's very good for us. Yeah, what does it do? So here's a study that says it's associated with your age. It's associated with being thin. Okay, this is a p-value. Smokers have got less vitamin D. Anemic patients have got less vitamin D. Low albumin, low protein, low calcium. Low calcium I think we can understand because vitamin D is involved in calcium metabolism. And then it says diagnosis of pulmonary tuberculosis is linked to a low vitamin D. So that sounds like not having vitamin D is really bad for you, and we've got to bring up my vitamin D, and that will prevent tuberculosis. Does that sound like a reasonable? Okay, it sounds a bit odd, doesn't it? But there is definitely a study where they went to hospitals with patients with tuberculosis and found that all those people had a lower vitamin D than people without tuberculosis. Odd, isn't it? Okay, I'll explain that in a minute. Diabetes, okay? Vitamin D, low levels of vitamin D are associated with type 2 diabetes. Isn't that amazing? So that means if you've got a low vitamin D, you are more likely to have type 2 diabetes, okay? And there's some data that shows that patients who have a low vitamin D have got a higher prevalence on the left-hand side of type 2 diabetes than those who've got a high vitamin D. So that makes you think that vitamin D deficiency causes diabetes and causes tuberculosis. Does that sound likely? What do you think's going on here? Why do you think low vitamin D is linked to these things? Because this is really what causes problems. They're not causative. Here we go. It says it again. It's my okay. It does not mean that one's cause has happened. So the reason this happens is that all of those three things are linked to poverty. Okay? If you are not wealthy, you are more likely to get type 2 diabetes. if you are not wealthy, you're more likely to get tuberculosis, and if you're not wealthy, you're more likely to have a low vitamin D. So it's nothing to do with vitamin D. I can't give vitamin D to people and prevent diabetes and prevent tuberculosis. So that is a very misleading study, okay? They're called association studies, and there's lots of them in the literature, and you read them and they get the Daily Mail, and they go, oh gosh, vitamin D, low levels will cause cancer. Have vitamin D, so everyone's taking vitamin D to prevent cancer and heart attacks and strokes and diabetes, but it doesn't work, because really, it's also being wealthy. That's what you need to be, okay? Lots of cash. And then you won't have any other diseases. There is unquestionably association with poverty. Okay, that's where it's come from. So you've got to be really careful. So where is it useful to these association studies? It's useful when you want to find there's no difference. Okay, if you think there's two drugs and you want to know there's no difference, because if you find a difference, then you need to be careful about bias. Maybe the group who got a lower X have got some other factor. Smoking is a big confounder because poor people smoke more. Okay, and poor people smoke more, therefore smoking is linked to lung cancer, but poverty is linked to lung cancer as well through that route. So there's so many links that are not real and not causative. So to prove that something's causative, you have to do what's called a randomized controlled trial. And to avoid bias, you need to make sure that nobody knows what drug you're on, which I'll tell you a bit, because that's a bit tricky. Okay, that can be difficult to do. So here's a study that we did, okay, and it's association, and it shows really that there's no difference between two things. And you can safely say that with an association study. And this is a very simple study where we looked at a load of people on hydrocortisone and a load of people on prednisolone, and they are basically very similar. And we measured lots of things like their weight and their blood pressure, and basically there's no difference. Well, this mouse works. Does it work? Oh yes, okay. So for example, there is the blood pressure, 129, 127. They're not significantly different. They're the same. Okay, so you find no difference. But I also asked everybody as they came in, how do you feel? Okay, and we gave them at the bottom a score of very unhappy to very happy. And this group here, the prednisolone group, were slightly happier at 4.1 compared to 3.7. Okay, and because of statistics, it looks significant. So people say, oh, maybe it's a better drug, but it's not really. It's because prednisolone is really more. It's once a day instead of 3 tablets a day. And I don't know if it really makes you feel better, or just the convenience might be the difference. But that's something that I'm interested in looking at. Okay. But everything else was important. There's no difference. So basically, you can say there's no difference between these two drugs, and therefore we can use either. If you find a difference, you then need to do something prospective, which I'll tell you what we're thinking about doing. Okay. So notice that dose. I don't know if any of you take prednisolone. People have got no adrenal to take prednisolone or hydrocortisone. And the dose of prednisolone that people seem to need is very low compared to what we used to think. We used to think that you need 5 milligrams or more. But it seems that 5 milligrams is too much. And you take a low dose, that it seems to work really well. Okay. Now I'll tell you a little bit about some research that we're doing, which is looking at cortisol. Cortisol is a hormone that your adrenal glands make, and it's controlled by our pituitary. And life on Earth has evolved for billions of years on an Earth that's rotating. Okay, look at that. Okay, going round and round, and there we are on it for years and years and years, and we have a day, light, night cycle, and all of us are exposed to light in the day and darkness at night, and over many, many, many years, your brain learns and evolves to have a rhythm to go with that time of day so that we can predict. That's what this was about. This is predicting what's going to happen, so your body predicts that you need to get up and hunt or gather and find food, or there are times when it predicts that you can go to sleep. And that's why we have this circadian rhythm, okay? And the question is, because the rhythm is controlled by your adrenal glands, how do we mimic that rhythm if you haven't got adrenal glands? Because that seems to be what's important, getting the timing right, okay? So this is a study that looks at levels of cortisol against time. So on the bottom here is a time of day, and you'll see, if I can get this mouse to work, that the level of cortisol rises at about 5 a.m., okay? And then it peaks at about 8:30. This is in a group of healthy volunteers who were locked in a hospital for a long time, and every day their blood sample taken several times a day. And you can see there's up and down, and whenever there's a bit of stress around, it goes up a bit. So you make a bit more cortisol when you're stressed. Okay, that's quite difficult to predict. So if you've got no adrenal glands, we need to try and mimic this kind of curve, and it's quite difficult to have a level going up before you wake up. That's obviously very difficult to achieve, but it's quite a nice idea to try. This is what we do. We give people hydrocortisone 3 times a day, which is that dotted line going up and down and up and down, up and down. And that black line is what we think we want. Okay, so it's a little bit high and a bit low, because the problem with cortisol is that it's got a short half-life if you take it by mouth. Okay, and basically any drug is destroyed by the liver and other parts of your metabolism so that you don't have accumulation. So we've got systems to clear everything we eat and drink. You know, alcohol and food, and it's got rid of by the liver and things. So if you take hydrocortisone by mouth, the level goes up and then it comes down quite quickly. And the problem is if you take one tablet, the level will decline to 0 a bit too early. So you need a second dose and a third dose. And we're beginning to think that these peaks may not be good, because if you have a bit too much cortisol, that has an effect on lots of things like your blood sugar levels. It's a very small increase. It might not really matter, but there's a hypothesis that they're not good for you. Okay. A lot of our doctors work night shifts. If you work night shifts, then it messes this up completely. Okay, so healthy people who do nights, are up at night, are not having a normal circadian rhythm. We're not designed to be up at night. Okay, and that's also probably, according to all of the studies that are coming through, a bit harmful, because it messes up normal people's cortisol metabolism. So if you do a week of nights, like a lot of doctors do, and sleep, but you can't sleep. Okay, it's difficult to sleep because where brains are triggered by this rhythm to keep into day-night cycle. So it might be not good to have a bit of extra boost there. Equally bad to work night shifts probably, and it seems to be the same kind of effect. Now to overcome that, there's various things that we can do. There's a drug called Plenodrin, which is a slow release preparation, okay? And what it does is you take it by mouth, and it goes through your gut, and instead of being released at the start, it continuously releases a bit of hydrocortisone, and that gives you that smoother curve, okay? And the only problem with it is that because it's in your gut all the way through, this is my advert that they put in the BMJ, because it's released all the time from your gut, it has other effects on you. So as I said, all drugs have benefits and side effects. So the benefits are that you haven't got to take lots of tablets a day, and there's peak. The peak is one peak and it comes down nice and smoothly. And the side effects, that because it's linked in with other substances that make it release slowly, it has GI side effects. Okay, and that's just what you'd expect from something that is in the gut for all that time, for example. Okay. So that's a balance, okay, because it's better to have it once a day, but it's not good if it's slow release. Now the thing I'm working on is prednisolone, which in fact has been around for about 100 years, less than that. But prednisolone is modified cortisol, and it's got a double bond that makes it quite difficult to break down for the body. So the liver clears cortisol quickly when it clears prednisolone slowly, because it didn't expect a double bond there, and it's just a slightly modified molecule. And we modify molecules all the time when we make drugs to make them last longer, because lasting long is quite a good idea. Now, as it happens, prednisolone was made a long time ago with cortisol, and people didn't recognize the fact that you could take it once a day, because it's licensed for many other things. So it's useful, for example, if you get colitis in big doses, it's very, very effective as an anti-inflammatory drug, and that's what it's mostly used as, anti-inflammatory drug. But if you give people a really small dose of prednisolone, it behaves just like cortisol, and that study I showed you comparing the two, and it lasts longer. And the good thing about prednisolone is that it's absorbed in one go, so it doesn't have all the GI side effects. But this is a bit early days in terms of research. Okay, it's got a longer half-life and it's a bit more potent. That's why you need 3 milligrams, because for cortisol you need 10, 5, 5. It's quite a bigger dose, but that's a level at which you get normal concentration. So we did a whole load of studies looking at which one is closest to the circadian rhythm, and it looks like prednisolone is the closest because of the shape of its curve compared to healthy volunteers. And that's levels from various healthy volunteers and patients looking at, because we were just working out what the right dose was. I looked at lots of papers around the world. I discovered that a lot of countries that didn't have hydrocortisone used prednisolone in low doses, but they all gave them 5 milligrams because that's all they had. But we now have 1 milligram tablets, and we now know that we can give lower strengths and that we can measure levels through them, try and get a curve. It's really difficult to get the dose right. That applies to both drugs, okay? Getting the dose right is difficult, because if you give someone not enough, they feel knackered. If you give them too much, they feel great, but of course it's not good because it has side effects in the long run, like high blood pressure and diabetes and so on. So getting the dose right is a crucial bit of the puzzle, really. So it looks like most people need between 3 and 4 milligrams daily. And we've got a protocol to try and do this, but this is new, okay? This has not been around. We've started this about 4 years ago. And what we really want to do is do a proper study, which is what I'm talking to you about at the moment, about what will this involve. This is a study that was done in Brazil in 2004, okay? Now, the other reason that we used replacement is in children who've got congenital adrenal hyperplasia, and they cannot make cortisol because they're born with an enzyme missing from their adrenal glands. And the problem is that when you give them hydrocortisone 3 times a day, the levels go up and down in the same way, and they thought prednisone would be better. So they, in this study, it says multiple daily hydrocortisone does not reproduce cortisol chronobiology. In other words, time of day and so on is not accurate. And so they tried a single morning oral dose of prednisolone in 2004, and they found that it had much better effects on the children's growth, because when children are growing, and if you give the wrong dose, they grow either too slowly or too quickly because they start making other hormones. And so they felt in the end, and this is what started me off on looking at prednisolone rather. I realized that these guys were onto something, and nobody else did, but in Brazil they're using prednisolone for children. And they basically were the first people to say that prednisolone is much more potent than people think, saying it's sort of 6 to 8 times more potent than hydrocortisone. Because before then, I wasn't keen on it, because everyone knows that prednisolone has got side effects. It causes osteoporosis and hypertension, but that's because we're using too much. Okay, when we use too much, then of course it will have all those effects. So having found this, we started doing the same thing all over again, and it looks like 3 or 4 milligrams of prednisolone is the equivalent of hydrocortisone. Okay, so we did a whole lot of publications and things explaining the differences between them. Okay, and this is a curve of a healthy volunteer on the left compared to prednisolone, showing time of day, showing they're very, very similar. Okay, and there's a patient. This is the first patient I switched over, saying, what do you think of this? Because I wasn't sure whether it would work, and she'd been on hydrocortisone for about 5 years. And so I emailed her, have you got any difference? And she said, I love this stuff, okay? Now, that's basically because of convenience, because rather than having it 3 times a day, she says, whereas with hydrocortisone, I had to keep thinking all the time not to forget it, so please can I switch to prednisolone? And she's on it now, and she's stable. So after that, I thought we should do a proper controlled trial. So first we've been using prednisolone for 4 years, and we looked at, in that study, as I showed you, all the patients on hydrocortisone and prednisolone, compared them and found no difference. So I think that's reasonable, because there's a worry that it might put your cholesterol up or it might make your bones weak or something. So showing there's no difference is quite important. But really the next question really is, how do we know that that is really the right drug to use? So what we have to do is a randomized controlled trial. As I told you, prednisolone is once a day. And if I give you prednisolone, you might be happier just because of that, as that patient was. That's great, once a day, okay? But is it a better drug? Do I feel better because it's a better drug? So to find that out, we've got to do a randomized control, brackets, blinded study, okay? Now that's really difficult to do. So what I'm proposing to do, and we've got ethics through, we just need to start making this stuff now, and that is to make hydrocortisone that looks the same as prednisolone, okay? And if you're on hydrocortisone, you'll get 10 in the morning, 5 at lunchtime, 5 in the evening. And if you're on prednisolone, you need 3 of prednisolone in 1 tablet, and then you need 2 placebo tablets so that you don't know which one you're on. That's a proper randomized controlled trial. So you don't know what you're on, it's not more convenient, and then we ask you how you feel. And I don't know, because I'm biased too, right? I'm totally biased. And so I'll say, are you sure if you're on the drug I favour? So I need to not know what's happening. So what happened is I go to our pharmacy and I give them both drugs and I tell them to make up boxes labelled A and B of prednisolone and hydrocortisone, okay, for patients who will volunteer to come. And then it's quite a lot of time commitment, which is why I need to think about this, because for you, okay, because what this means is, supposing you say, okay, I'll take part in this study, okay, the gain to you personally is nothing. Right? The gain is to find out which one is really better. And it's possible we'll find they're exactly the same. Okay? Which is okay. That's okay. The research, the retrospectives that we've done so far make them look the same. But maybe one really is better. Okay? And that's what I really want to know. It's possible that the late peaks are really not good, and maybe they push up your cholesterol a bit, or maybe just make you feel a bit knackered. I don't know. Okay? Now, to ask people how they feel on a daily basis is a bit tedious, okay? But it can be done. And there are these kind of questionnaires that we put out, or that put out by various experts. And so what you do is you come to pharmacy and they'll give you box and they'll say, for 4 months, because it worked out, it probably takes 4 months to equilibrate, take this box here, which has got A, B, and C. You take A in the morning, B at lunchtime, C at 4 p.m. for 4 months. And in that time, once a week, you report how you feel. And then, at the end of 4 months, you take box B and you do exactly the same thing. And one box, in random order, because I won't know which is which, will have prednisolone and one will have hydrocortisone. And at the end of that, when we've got maybe 50 people have done all of this around the country, we'll put the data down and look at the cholesterol, the blood pressure, how you feel on that questionnaire, lots of data together. And then we'll be able to say in a major publication, this is definitely the better drug, whichever one it is. Okay? At the moment, they look the same, but there's lots of things we can do. And in that time, throughout if it's a 4-month period, probably at the beginning, middle, and end, we'd like some blood to measure lots of things, like your immune system, because too much might suppress the immune system, your white cells, your levels of cortisol, your cholesterol, and we might measure you to see if you become thinner or fatter, because these drugs in excess might make people put on weight. And then at the end of that, we'll have an answer. So that's the kind of thing that is really hard work for patients, okay? There's lots of studies like this is just one example, okay? We're doing a similar thing with calcium or 1-alpha. There's PTH replacement. There's lots of randomized trials that will be starting out. And people like you who need 1-alpha calcidol or calcium or hydrocortisone or something like that can really take part, especially if you're well informed and understand about these things. And of course, the important thing, because we are all biased, okay? So if I think one of them is better, and I'm taking it, I might actually feel better because I believe it's better. And that will go with the randomized blinded control trial.